Not every wrestler can be a mechanic in the ring, but some don't have to be in order to become a superstar. And when it comes to wrestlers who have a lack of ability but also have a high demand to look good, it requires a specific breed to carry a lesser talent through to a good match. Now, sometimes bad wrestlers have gotten themselves carried into having a good career, and other times good wrestlers just have an off night and need a little bit of carrying to get through a match. But what does the term carrying really mean? Well, one thing that it definitely is the topic of this episode, because today, Dave knows what it means to carry a wrestler. The term carry gets used a lot among those who discuss wrestling, but it can be hard to define. And since us fans are not involved in the process and are only watching matches as spectators, knowing for sure if someone is getting carried throughout a match is not always easy to do. Plus, the definition of a good match changes depending on who you ask. So, saying that someone carried someone else into a good match can be a bit tricky if those involved in the discussion don't agree on what a good match is in the first place. However, there are still some things that we can discern with a fair amount of confidence. Sometimes we get the privilege of some backstage interviews or other forms of behind-the-scenes details that can help to decipher if someone was indeed being carried. And also, there are other hallmarks of what good means that may not be universally agreed upon, but definitely serve as a solid gauge. In fact, I have several episodes going into further detail on what some of these factors are. Now, before we begin, allow me to make it perfectly clear that just because these techniques can be used to carry a wrestler, that doesn't mean that they're always used to carry a wrestler. If that was the case, a lot of people would be getting carried all the time. And I'm not trying to say that. And also, really try to remember, being carried isn't always necessarily a bad thing. But with all that being said, why don't we just begin talking about being carried? First off, one of the easiest things to recognize when a wrestler is being carried is, well, time. How long the match goes for can be a great indicator. For example, there are some wrestlers who suffer from poor cardio, typically having very short matches, no longer than 5 minutes. Now, guys like these tend to get booked to squash their opponents like they were nothing. And sure, this might work to get them over, but when it comes time for them to step up to be a top guy, a little bit of duration will go a long way. Audiences will not stand for a microwave main event, so guys like these will have to get carried, even if their lungs won't allow for it. So when you have a guy like Baron Corbin, who early in his NXT days would only have short squash matches, and even when he wrestled against Bull Dempsey in his first hype feud, and it still only lasted about 5 minutes, and then you also tend to notice that he gets blown up pretty easily, huffing and puffing, breathing heavy almost the entire way through, then it becomes fair to say that if he does have a match that lasts 10 minutes or more, it's probably thanks to his opponent carrying him through his lack of breathing ability. However, in order to carry the cardio challenged right, we shouldn't just be seeing a whole bunch of rest holds or breaks in the action by them going to the outside or doing anything where the two wrestlers avoid each other. There should be a fair amount of contact and a varied set of moves, which brings me to my next point, the moveset. There are some wrestlers out there that have a move repertoire that doesn't run all that deep. They've mastered little more than punching and kicking and whatever pick things up and put them down finisher that they were assigned. And while they might be perfectly fine with that, wrestling snobs like myself will always demand more. And fortunately, there are also wrestlers in the industry who will demand more too. But how exactly do you get more moves out of a guy whose wrestling brain is already at capacity, only being 3 deep? Well, there are some moves that can be added to your arsenal without you really needing to do anything. Sure, there are tons of wrestling moves out there that are very complicated to apply and can confuse even lifelong wrestling fans. However, again, as previously covered, there are also some moves where the person taking it is doing all of the work. You can check that video out after this one. Take for example the vertical suplex. Moves like these are great because you can almost instantly add it to any lesser talent's arsenal since it requires them doing barely anything more than just holding you. And anytime a wrestler can bump up another wrestler's set list, making them look more versed than they are, it's a good example of carrying someone. Although it's one thing to give one wrestler one move, it's quite another to give them several moves, let alone stringing them together. Or should I say, chaining, which is actually my biggest point on this matter. A very early video of this channel was all about chain wrestling, where I talked about a different kind of way to watch and score a professional wrestling match. And again, you could check that video out later as well. Anyway, if you stick to that point counting system, you notice that some wrestlers will commonly have sequences that score 3 or higher repeatedly throughout a single match, and they will also typically have at least one really high scoring chain as well. But conversely, some wrestlers won't chain at all. However, when you put a high scorer in with a low scorer and the overall count of the match is still pretty good, well, well, that's probably a good sign that the low man just got himself carried to a better match. But chain wrestling, as I said in that previous video, is just one mark of talent and may not be everyone's most important factor. Another is of course storytelling and also ring psychology, and again I previously covered those too. Anyway, another way to elevate another wrestler's game is through pure psychological warfare, and I don't mean like having two head voices that just won't leave you alone. How about this classic example? Let's say you're going against a big lumbering wrestler who can't really move all that well and isn't very fast and doesn't have a whole lot of maneuvers. Well, if you are really good at selling and drawing out the moment, you can help to make this match more exciting by using those skills to pull in the audience. For instance, let's just say the big man punches you, and you sell the punch really hard and more intense than you normally would. This helps to convince the audience that you really are in pain, and it makes the huge wrestler seem all that more powerful. If done right, the audience will be waiting with bated breath to see what happens the next time he hits you. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to them, what they're really looking forward to is just seeing your next reaction, more so than anything else. And if you just happen to be heel and you avoid the big baby face for a while, drawing out the moment, running around cowardly, well, this will make the next time he hits you even better, just by teasing it a bit first before you go ahead and deliver on the goods. Oh, and if you could just cheap shot him a little bit, or have your manager distract him and then get your offense in for a while before he overcomes you, well, that would be good too. Plus, this will get the audience to really anticipate your opponent's finisher, since they already know what one mere punch can do. And when he delivers that devastating looking finale, the audience will have been sucked into the tale of a big man who was so powerful that his opponent ran away in fear, only to find that the end was inevitable. And with any luck, they'll be so into the match that they don't even notice that the big man did little more than just punch and his finisher. But don't think that this is all just smaller guys carrying big guys. Sometimes the reverse happens too. A talented big man can sell and act more, really solidifying a smaller opponent's offense in order to make up for their lack of strength. That way, no one notices that the little guy isn't strong enough to do a simple move like a body slam. And also, you might think that being carried in a match is a bad thing or insulting, and that only poor talents get carried. This is not necessarily so. Yes, less skilled individuals do get carried, but good wrestlers also can get carried sometimes too. For example, many rookie wrestlers get carried by veterans because, as much training as they have to go through, being put out there in the real world is totally different. And trial by fire while being guided by a master is still part of the learning process, and it's also nothing to be ashamed of. And it's not just new wrestlers needing help either. Wrestlers can also need help when they become older and they just start losing a step. Also, a little bit of hand-holding can go a long way when a wrestler is just coming back from injury and still has some ring rust. Oh, and of course, sometimes even really good wrestlers just have an off day. Take for example, SummerSlam 1992 and the British Bulldog. Now this goes down in history as one of the greatest SummerSlam matches of all time, and that also makes it one of the most impressive carries of all time. As the story goes, Bret the Hitman Hart and the British Bulldog were going into the biggest match of both of their careers at that point, which was to be held at SummerSlam in Wembley Stadium. Now they had previously gone over the entire match, Bret being well known for being particularly thorough in his planning. However, the Bulldog had spent the days leading up to the show fairly intoxicated and, well, forgot everything. Bret ended up calling the entire match on the fly, calling out the spots leading all the way through until the end, including some very intricate looking sequences. And to the credit of both men, you would never have any idea. So there you go, my thoughts on what it means to carry a wrestler through a good match. Whether it's through calling spots, stretching out a match in order to cover up cardio issues, adding moves to a repertoire, being a great salesman, being a great storyteller, or just picking up the slack when a good wrestler is having an off day, a wrestler carrying a wrestler serves to remind us that wrestling is, at its best, when it's about people working together and not against each other in order to create something great. And speaking of working together, I want to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters out there like Richard Lee. Thank you so much for keeping this channel going, and if you want to be like Richard Lee and be a part of supporting this channel, then go over to my Patreon page. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.